Klay, an ordinary hunter who was taught absolutely nothing by her useless father, well, other than how to survive on her own. Before leaving to get the milk, her father gave her immense knowledge and power to explore dungeons so she wouldn't become a useless orphan like yourself. Thanks to this, Klay is known as a powerful yet questionable dungeon explorer that even makes it so far as to the 10th floor. But when she accidentally stumbles across the strongest boss of the dungeon, everything spirals into unexpected troubles. Back when she was younger, Klay had undergone strict discipline under her father's training to become able to clear dangerous dungeons. Since they were thieves, they had no magic to rely on to clear them easily, so their agility and maintaining their stamina is key. Despite that, Klay always knew that Brance was an awful teacher, but he didn't abandon her like yours did. Okay, well, he may have abandoned her 3 years later, but he did leave Klay with some valuable experience that came in handy in surpassing the elitist of the Thieves Adventurers Guild. As she advanced deep into the 9th floor, Klay noticed the presence of 2 goblins and one that looks quite similar to yourself in the back. Not one to waste time, Klay went ahead to get rid of the mage in the back, which was achieved with relative ease. With the main threat being neutralized, Klay eliminated the peak of goblin masculinity figures just as easily. In exchange for some high-value gems, this was worth it for the young girl. There was no time for her to celebrate this achievement, because Klay still needed to deal with more incoming dangers now despite her current limitations. As she entered the monster's room, Klay figured that she's going to fight a minotaur, which turned out to be fast on top of being strong. To her surprise, the minotaur broke the dungeon's wall with his axe, but that paled in comparison to the knowledge that it could speak eloquently too. The minotaur was actually concerned about the arrival of the dungeon's administrator, which seemed to be incredibly powerful based on the aura that Klay could sense, until she came across the realization that this powerful Discord mod is a plain Belle. Despite looking completely clueless, Belle couldn't help but assume that the Minotaur had been slacking at his job, where he kept on talking to an adventurer instead of fighting, in a typical the boss isn't mad, just disappointed. After admitting that the wall's destruction was her fault, Belle proceeded to ask Klay to follow her to have a word together. Klay remained on her guard around this new powerful person, but Belle assured her that there's nothing to fear, for there's no monsters in the residential quarters. By the time Klay began to wonder about what makes Belle live in the dungeon, the two arrived at the meeting room, where Belle introduced herself properly and made sure to let Klay know that she does know about her, for being a skilled adventurer that is. Apparently Belle was struggling to find a good explorer. She promptly looked at anyone at the Adventurers Guild, as she thought that they're so bad they couldn't get past the 7th. Realizing that Belle is the final boss of this dungeon, Klay pointed out that she wants to duel Belle. If she wins, she'll leave the dungeon, but if she loses, she'll have to work for Belle. After all, Klay believed that her father must be on the 10th floor of this dungeon. At least she has a clue over where her father is. Hearing this, Belle relented to Klay's request and took her to the 10th floor, where there's no walls to keep people out, for this domain is inaccessible without specific steps to begin with. More importantly for Belle, Brance wasn't even there to help Klay. The latter attempted to use every trick in the book to get an edge against the Discord mod, but Belle turned out to be a much tougher nut to crack than she thought, because Belle had some tricks up her sleeves, and she did use them the moment she got herself some distance from Klay. The next thing she knew was that she was in Belle's bedroom. The latter assured that the dungeon's wall had been fixed, before getting excited over the prospect of working side by side with Klay. Being the airhead that she is, Klay didn't know anything about management or handling operations, just like yourself, except Klay was actually open to the idea of getting a job. Fortunately for her, Belle came in clutch to tell her that their job involves restocking low-level monsters, repairing traps, and serving as an HR department to hire monsters. As for the Thieves Guild, Belle assured Klay that she'll inform them of her new position. Klay reluctantly accepted, only to be utterly terrorized when she learned that Belle was considering removing her memories if she refused to comply. For the record, Belle stood against having Klay living like a homeless person in the dungeon's corridor, as well as offering her a generous 5 golden coins per day, which made Klay swallow her pride and get to work in earnest, because that's how you speak to cash. For a bit of a backstory, this dungeon was found by a traveler named Murek. As news of this discovery spread, more adventurers began to come into the area and settle until an Adventurers Guild branch was established. Eventually, even the town took the name Antimerk. From that village, Klay joined the Thieves Guild, and the rest is history. For starters, Belle showed Klay around her new room, which has a window and a light to mimic what would make humans comfortable at home. To Clay's shock, this room used to be a guest's room at first, which wasn't used at all. On top of that, Belle stated that monsters made lots of complaints about how dark the dungeon used to be. Seeing that Belle had no real important tasks to give her, Klay began to assume that Belle is actually a loser who had no real duties. Belle, on the other hand, pointed out that she doesn't have much to do for there's only low-level adventurers in the dungeons. As such, it became of greater importance for her to focus on recruiting Klay. Now that this objective has been achieved, Belle decided to show her new recruit around.
では、改めてご案内しますね。よろしく頼む。制御室です。
Belle then proceeded to show her new recruit around the dungeon, from the slightly chaotic planning room that seems even more organized than my life, to the guest's toilet which is occasionally used by Belle herself. Let's also not forget about the kitchen, that a part of it got turned into a storehouse that kept monster products cool. Just as Klay began to get some funny ideas about what Belle has been doing to monsters in this dungeon, the latter pointed out that she's got rid of those monsters after they consented. Before long, Klay found herself discovering things that Belle wasn't willing to show initially, a storage room for junks basically. Not wanting to further embarrass her new boss, Klay decided to. Insisted to keep on moving, which made Belle take Klay to the crystal room, where fixed magic is used alongside the massive crystal in the room. To demonstrate how that works, Belle asked Klay to pick whatever rock she wants, where the latter discovered that they're all coming from monsters that had been slain. Seeing this, Klay realized a pattern. She has been putting her life on the line time and again, only for these monsters to respawn because of the crystal room's magic. Belle, however, clarified that the slain monster's origin will be maintained inside these stones, while a copy of them will be used in the next fights in their stead, using that one gemstone that is. Once these gems have served their purposes, they'll be stocked in this room. On the other hand, Klay realized how much she struggled to get to the 9th floor, and that she must grow stronger if she ever plans on beating this dungeon once and for all. She was even more determined to achieve that goal by Belle's promise to find her a good training partner. But Belle ran into a problem as she was about to start creating a training partner, because that partner turned out to be none other than Klay herself. Nevertheless, Belle proceeded with her creation until Klay merged out of the large gemstone. But of course, Belle told her to dress up once again. Although this was an embarrassing event for both Belle and Klay, Klay decided to play it cool and asked her boss to pay more attention the next time. Now that this mess is over, Belle took Klay through a teleportation point to a mine, where she got introduced to a miner called Rangard, who's in charge of floors 1 through 4. After seeing too many faces in this dungeon, it didn't take him long to figure out that she's that loser that has no friends that kept on fighting on her own. Which Klay, although she found that statement to be rude, admitted that she doesn't need friends in dungeons, much to Belle's surprise. On the dimly lit first floor of the dungeon, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and the echoes of distant clanging, Klay expertly navigated through the maze of crumbling pillars and shadows. With the grace of a seasoned rogue, she slipped past a group of unsuspecting adventurers huddled around a flickering torch, their laughter punctuating the tense atmosphere. Her movements were fluid and silent, a testament to her skills in stealth. Meanwhile, Rangard, lurking in a nearby alcove, watched in astonishment. His brows furrowed with disbelief as he observed how effortlessly Klay maneuvered around the armed warriors, who were far too engrossed in their own banter to notice her. Just moments before, he had hesitated to partner with her, doubting her abilities. Now, he felt a mix of admiration and perplexity at how she seemed to vanish into the shadows, proving that sometimes the most underestimated individuals could surpass expectations in the most remarkable ways. Once Klay managed to resupply the first room, she proceeded with her mission to resupply other rooms as she coordinated with Rangard, further impressing him. Thinking that he wasn't willing to accept her for being talented, Klay roasted the guy for being an amateur dwarf. As she insisted on explaining her genius in the art of sneaking, Rangard was alerted that there are more treasure chests that need to be refilled on the 2nd floor, and for that, he asked Klay to do that task, which she obliged. Heck, she was even willing to take the quickest way to the 3rd floor to get supplies for the 2nd, which despite Rangard's suspicions that she could do initially, only to be left speechless by how easily Klay made it to the 3rd floor's entrance. If that wasn't enough, Klay surprised the rock workers on the 3rd floor by her persistence to deliver 2 supply boxes to the 2nd floor through the same way she took earlier, even though there were stairs that she could take. Seeing that the runts were impressed by her moves earlier, Rangard asked Klay if she could teach them how to jump around like that, a request that Klay promptly refused. Once she was done with work, Klay went to Belle's room to see her doing some concentration exercises. Cleaning her room, only to inform her that, according to Rangard, she was a bad influence on the runts, that she's not allowed to work with them for the foreseeable future. I wonder why. Seeing that Belle is struggling with cleaning her room, Klay insisted that she help out in getting rid of what is no longer needed. She even took the freedom to decide what's still usable. The next day, the debate over what to keep and what to throw out proceeded, until Klay finally managed to clean the entire room. By the time they were done, Rangard arrived and began to argue with Klay that Belle is the type that cannot live without a mess in her room. As for what brings him here to begin with, Rangard came in to bring a new chair for Belle, while impressing Klay that he can create chairs and weapons, which got him blushing like your average e-girl after getting praised. Now that Mr. Dwarf went back to his diggy hole mission, Klay sat to have a discussion with Belle where she called her by her full name. But that aside, Klay and Belle sat down to watch a group of people trying to get their way past floor 7. How they're gonna watch it, you might ask? By starting their mirror on the wall session to broadcast the adventurers' movements across the floor. To Belle's surprise, the adventurers group that is now trying to clear that floor have tried to riz Klay before. Fen in particular has tried to do so, but ended up failing miserably.
入れてあげてもいいと思ってるんだが。
遠慮しておく。
Still, Klay realized only now that Fen and his goons must have been actual decent adventurers, despite not being that active in the dungeon. While they were at it, Belle suggested that Klay fights against the Ice Wolf Fangs, Fen's guild, but Klay refused. As such, Belle contacted one of her underlings, Cratesy, to get him to help Klay to fight Fen and his boys. After hearing that Klay can join in disguised as a skeleton, things were settled, just as Klay was having her head in the clouds. Of course, Klay was skeptical of the whole thing at first, since she wasn't paying any attention. But Belle assured her that everything is going to be fine, for she and Cratesy know what they got. Seeing that Klay had given up on trying to activate her brain, Belle proceeded with her plan to get Klay into the fight. To her astonishment, the soul transfer procedure unfolded seamlessly, without a hint of the complications she had anticipated. Once the process was complete, she exchanged warm introductions with Cratesy, her new companion in this unfamiliar realm. Klay learned that her mission was one of freedom and exploration. She was encouraged to pursue her desires and aspirations without restraint. However, she also discovered that her new form came with limitations that would prevent her from fully unleashing her inherent power. Recognizing this challenge, Cratesy offered to support her from the shadows, guiding and assisting her as she navigated this new existence while she learned to harness her abilities in a way that aligned with her true potential. Once she was done with her tutorial session on how to play as a skeleton, Klay moved in for the real fight. On the way there, she was surprised to learn that she's been a hot topic among all the monsters of this dungeon, especially after getting beaten and tamed by the administrator. More importantly for Klay was the idea of having the guts to eliminate her fellow humans, which made her remember one of the many lessons her father taught her: other humans are dangerous, so they should be avoided. Her personal experiences with other adventurers had further invigorated her stance, so she didn't mind hurting other adventurers if need came to be. During this conversation, the Ice Wolf Fang's thief spotted their presence and went ahead to report that to Fen. Klay also was aware of what happened, so she prepared herself for what was to come. As for Fen, he decided to go with Gayam to take down the skeletons, while leaving Lada to back them up, Auntie to use support magic to help them out, and Harmine to go for a big attack on the Lick. With everyone taking his position for the fight, it's time for the show to start. Before this fight, Cratesy vividly recalled his agreement to Belle's insistence that he accompany Klay as they ventured as deep into the dungeon as possible. The thought weighed on his mind, particularly because he was unsure whether his skills and physical strength would prove sufficient for the treacherous challenges that awaited them on the daunting 9th and 10th floors. As he stood at the threshold, tension mingled with a flicker of resolve. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and the distant echoes of lurking dangers, reminding him of the stakes ahead. Back to reality, Klay kept on analyzing her surroundings and what everyone is up to, including Harmine, realizing that she can use the advantages that a skeleton has to her own benefits to beat down Fen and Lada. Despite everyone's surprise by this impressive display of skills, Fen and his team were not done yet, but so is Klay, as her skeleton body possesses immense magical powers that she used to strengthen her shield against Harmine's attack. As the attack was launched at them, Klay had a brief flashback of what her father taught her about the magical powers, especially about the importance of wielding it if other living beings possess it. Thanks to this advice, Klay managed to repel the incoming attack without breaking a sweat, to the surprise of everyone. Left with no other options, Fen ordered the rest of his team to withdraw immediately, which they agreed to, save for Lada, who was confident in his ability to help Fen out and retreat just as fast. Klay saw Lada throwing a dagger at her, so she dodged it, only for it to hit Cratesy in his skull.
牽制にもならない。
Wow.
As the latter removed his mask to take the dagger out of it, Fen and latter ran away immediately. Klay, on the other hand, refused to go on hot pursuit as she saw no need to do so, while Crazy became determined that he's fine with staying in the 7th floor since he knew for a fact that he's no match for Klay. With this fight being over, Clay's soul was brought up to her body with no issues. As she fully woke up, she reported what she learned about her opponents and herself in this experience as fighting as a monster. She was disappointed that the Ice Wolf Fang had retreated, but came to realize that they did that after their encounter with a certain shield-wielding skeleton that was definitely not possessed by Klay. Crazy, for his part, expressed how impressed he was by Clay's performance, even though he admitted that she's way too good for this floor. Although disappointed, Klay wanted to know what her next job will be as she addressed Belle by her full name, which got Belle to finally ask her to call her by a shorter name, which got Klay to think of Behea, before finally settling down with her boss to call her as Belle, which sounded good to Klay. Realizing that they had no more work to do, Klay decided to get Belle to become workaholic. One night, an incident that took place in the capital Recruitment, where the Thieves Guild headquarters had vanished without a trace. Even the staffs that worked there disappeared with it, just like my father. Back to present time, Klay found herself surprised to see herself teleported underneath the Thieves Guild building. The guild was known for having information about everything, and there were even rumors that they carry out assassinations behind the scene. Before Klay could say another word, she found that they arrived at their destination, which was a room that had an old man called Renfringe, with his assistant Furin, who were residing in a special branch of the Thieves Guild that didn't vanish. What Renfringe didn't expect was that Klay could get herself to work with the dungeon instead. Klay also didn't expect that the Thieves Guild was the one that provided the dungeon with its loots and supplies. From expanded bags to return scrolls, Klay couldn't help but feel like she was dancing in Belle's hands all this time. What she didn't know was that this system had been implemented by her predecessors, since all of the casualties used to be caused by booby traps in the dungeon. As such, the predecessors decided to implement the importance of the thieves in guilds. Still, that didn't stop Klay from figuring out that the dungeon staff are still in cahoot. After all, the main branch of the Adventurers Guild went as far as to send assassins after Belle and her predecessor, which eventually led to the incident of Recruitment, where the dungeon became untouchable. Understandably, Klay was left speechless from this revelation. Once Renfringe concluded her discussion with Belle, a wave of disappointment washed over her upon learning that Klay had been unable to uncover any leads regarding her father or his current location. Despite this setback, she remained steadfast in her belief that he had somehow reached the elusive 10th floor of the dungeons. Deep down, though, a part of her entertained the whimsical notion that he might instead be wandering in the fabled Kingdom of Milk, a fantastical realm whispered about in legends. The atmosphere shifted as she learned that Klay had successfully navigated his way down to the 9th floor. Fueled by a mix of curiosity and determination, Renfringe launched an immediate attack on him, eager to put her skills to the test. In the heat of their encounter, she discovered that Clay's past was rooted in a remarkable history. He had once held the esteemed title of the best thief within the guild, pulling off elaborate heists with unrivaled cunning. However, much to his dismay, his talents had caught the attention of the higher-ups, leading to his recruitment as a dungeon administrator, a role that stripped him of the freedom he once relished and replaced it with the burden of bureaucracy and oversight. Just as they were about to take their leave, Klay learned from the old man that her father is still stuck inside the dungeon. Once they got back home, Belle assured Klay that making verbal deals in this case of expandable bags is fine for the perks that they'll be able to make use of, which includes transferring documents. Speaking of which, Belle also relies on slimes to do that. For Klay, however, the most important task for her was finding clues that would lead her to her father, even if it meant using these damaged bags to get a clue on his whereabouts, especially that she didn't want to end up being mocked by her father for finding him through connections. She was impressed by how quickly her boss was able to get her new tasks to take care of, such as helping Rangard in fixing the expandable bags. While they were at it, Rangard was impressed by the fact that Klay was able to tear each part of the bags, before asking her to let him take care of reassembling them. Before she could leave, Rangard asked Klay to lend him her weapon to refine it. Klay turned down the offer as she couldn't bear to accept getting a little preferential treatment, but Rangard insisted that he does, for Klay is one of them now, thus making the girl finally relent. Despite that, her dagger turned out to be an adjustable, for according to both Belle and Rignard, the tool and its user should serve to elevate each other's strength. In other terms, the dagger isn't able to display its full potential for it hasn't recognized Klay as its owner yet. Being the idiot that she is, Klay began to talk to the dagger as she believed that it's alive. As for where she got it, it was from none other than her father, who left it with a note before departing to Switzerland. To Klay's surprise, her father got the dagger from the 10th floor of the abyss, and due to its dangerous nature, Belle did put restrictions on its capabilities. As such, it's necessary for Klay to make it to the 10th floor to make full use of her weapon. As impressed as Klay was to hear about these buffs, she was relieved to learn that her assumption about her father was true, so she refused to get the restrictions lifted off her weapon. Hearing this, Belle decided to show Klay to the monster's lodging to get her to train there. For starters, the two arrived at the shared lobby, where Klay figured that she did meet most of the monsters there. The bad news is that monsters have recognized her and were glaring at her just like your toxic ex, and not even Klay's best attempts to get herself on good grounds with them could stop them from glaring at her. Or so Klay have thought, because all monsters shifted their demeanor a moment later to smiling and being friendly just like your creepy uncle. One of them even claimed that he knows about her father. Before she could even react, however, Belle decided to put an end to this mayhem. Belle proceeded to take her to the arena, where she showed it around to Klay and made it clear that she needs to register in the crystal if she wants to use the arena. To the not-so-surprising shock of Klay, there were monsters that didn't care much about their lives, such as the two alpha goblins and their angry nerd mage goblin from episode 1. In fact, these three had some business to discuss with Klay, and they figured that they could reach out to her only in the arena. Ever the quick-witted girl that she is, Klay began to wonder if the trio are actually goblins, to which the nerd introduced himself as Shieldmerk, while his brothers are Bondog and Bandig, and that they're high-class goblins. As Klay started to appreciate the depth of their intelligence, Bandig boldly stepped forward and inquired if Klay would be interested in participating in cultural activities, a suggestion that hung in the air with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Klay's subsequent change of heart spoke volumes about her evolving perspective, revealing a newfound openness that contrasted sharply with Shieldmerg's deepening outrage, a response that was both passionate and fervent, revealing his unwavering convictions. Meanwhile, Belle stood on the precipice of unleashing her inner turmoil, a tempest of emotions waiting to break free, adding an unspoken tension to the scene that would soon come to a head. Figuring that the Giblins came to ask for another duel against Klay, the girl agreed, while making it clear that they must restrain themselves from having so much bloodlust, since that was their undoing the last time they fought. Now that both parties agreed, Klay went to the entrance room to stand with that oblivious look as my mother has when she used a smartphone for the first time, even though Belle tried her best to explain how to use the crystal in it in simple terms. Once she entered the arena, Klay made sure she asked the nerd to cast his support magic in advance, just to get her to stay more focused on fighting them, since there's no traps in the arena. Seeing the goblins have heeded her request, Klay used their naivety to take down one of the alpha goblins and Shieldmerk, while forcing the last remaining to surrender. Just as she thought that everything was over, however, a dragon called Railmond appeared to challenge the girl. Although he possessed the appearance of a spooky, scary giant lizard, Railmond was eloquent enough to express how impressed he was by how strong Klay is. On the other hand, Klay was shocked that she couldn't notice Railmond's powerful presence until she learned that he came in to serve as her training partner, for he was initially designed to be the 10th floor's boss. Once both were ready, the fighting started in earnest, and although she was aware of her limitations in this fight, Klay gave it her best shot. It only took her the realization that she's training now, and that she should use this chance to further sharpen her senses instead of solely relying on her vision. Although Klay didn't manage to inflict significant damage on Railmond, she managed to pierce a little bit through the lizard's tough skin. Realizing how far she became accustomed to using magic after her experience in being a spooky, scary skeleton herself, Klay proceeded in unleashing a new level of strength to shred Railmond to pieces. Or so she thought, as she found herself out of position. And Railmond exploited this chance to attack Klay, which managed to severely weaken her but not finish her off, because Klay managed in the nick of time to deflect the dragon's attack, albeit at the price of losing an arm. Since Railmond lost an eye himself earlier, he suggested that they call it a day here, to which Klay agreed. Once she bailed out of the arena, Belle got excited to learn that Klay found it to be good for training, but also was taken aback when Klay said that the arena ended up draining her motivation, especially when she realized the strength gap between her and her father. Still, Klay was relieved to learn more about the progress that she had made so far. But that aside, she had some equally important issue to attend to, which is asking Belle about the nature of her job here, since there's nothing Klay did so far that she could consider as work. Not wanting to look weak, Belle explained that Klay is working by simply being there, and that any lack of tasks is not something she should be concerned about. Apparently, Belle was in need of working personnel, but she didn't have any clue what to do with them. For some reason that sounds like your average medieval landlord. But I digress. After giving it a little thought, Belle suggested that Klay keep on refilling the treasure chests. In order to do that, Belle took her recruit to where she's keeping her treasure's materials, which is as chaotic as my brain goes when I'm about to say something important. If that wasn't enough, Klay was even more shocked when she heard Belle asking her to fill the treasures with literally whatever, as she thought that that might include her beloved dagger. In fact, Belle wanted to get some better quality rewards for the early floors, but Rangard stood against the idea and threw all of her stuff away. Hearing this, Klay agreed to help to the best of her ability, on condition that this room must be cleaned right after. Belle reluctantly agreed. Despite their earnest efforts to gather quality materials for the treasure chests, the ambitions of Belle and Klay came crashing down when Rangard, with an air of authority, firmly refused to allow them to proceed with their preferred methods. Belle was taken aback, not only by Rangard's unyielding stance but also by Klay's surprising compliance. She watched in disbelief as Klay willingly assisted Rangard with his responsibilities, completely disregarding her earlier enthusiasm and suggestions. After Belle finished tidying up the cluttered materials storage room, she had hoped they would collaborate in crafting their vision, but instead, she felt a pang of betrayal as she witnessed Klay turning his back on their shared dreams. The atmosphere, once filled with excitement, now hung heavy with disappointment, leaving Belle to grapple with the unexpected dynamics of their partnership. A few hours later, Klay did show up to help Rangard out with digging ores behind Belle's back, since she can already do that in a matter of seconds. As Rangard kept on explaining that out, they ran onto the blacksmithery, where golems were running it on their own smoothly thanks to their personality traits, much to Klay's surprise. As for Rangard himself, he's tasked with working in the cramped back of the blacksmithery, since it's the most convenient place for him. Rangard then handed the girl 2 daggers he made himself to see what's the most fitting for her, but Klay turned down the offer as she believed that there's a chance she'll run into a far stronger weapon in the dungeon eventually. After all, Klay had already figured that the dagger she's possessing now is Rangard's creation anyway. As much as he was impressed by Klay's intuition, Rangard pointed out that the quality of materials that Klay might find on the 9th floor might be the same as anything that Golems makes. But Klay didn't mind that, further impressing the old man by how good of a motivational person she is. Once they settled into a cozy corner of the bustling cafe, steaming cups of tea in hand, Klay and Belle began a heartfelt conversation. As they sipped their drinks, Klay discovered the weight of Belle's inherited legacy. She expressed her struggle to break free from the expectations of her ancestors, who had been singularly focused on building and expanding the dungeon's depths. Rather than following in their footsteps as a constructor or warrior, Belle had chosen a different path. She aimed to be an administrator, someone who could foster relationships and create alliances rather than solely relying on the dungeon's oppressive architecture. Belle's longing for companionship became evident as she spoke, her voice tinged with a quiet longing. She confided in Klay that witnessing others banding together in the perilous underground environment often left her feeling isolated. The camaraderie displayed among adventurers starkly contrasted with her own solitude, a reminder of the battles she fought in silence, yearning for allies who could share the burdens of leadership and purpose alongside her. Once she was done with this discussion, Klay went back to her boss, where she expressed how amazing the time she spent with Rangard was, especially when she realized that she can't even perform some magic techniques. Of course, Klay told Belle that Rangard told her things about her, but she didn't specify what he said exactly though, as she thought more about the nature of work in this dungeon, which she learned from her ancestors before piecing out after hearing about recruitments in milk factories. Add to that the fact that Belle sees Rangard as a family, Klay felt that she can strongly relate to Belle, except when Belle tried to address things in a more direct fashion to Rangard. But I digress. Sometime later, Klay sat with Belle to eat, where the latter was surprised that Klay hates eating veggies, since she grew up on eating meat and water. Now that she noticed that she's not doing any hunting or physically demanding activities, Klay decided to give cooking veggies a try. In her assassin style, that is, albeit she knew nothing about seasoning her food, as she believed that that's something that professional chefs do. It turned out that that's what her dad taught her, and she believed it as she used a small dose of salt in her food. You want to know how small it is? There you have it. Apparently this revelation was so outrageous, so much that Rangard came in to teach Klay about how to use salt, before turning out to Belle to ask for water, which is what he refers to alcohol as. As for actual water, however, Rangard refers to it as disappointment, just like how Asian parents refer to their kids. When Klay learned that Rangard lives off of meat and alcohol, she began to contemplate imitating him, while completely disregarding that that's a racial trait. As the time for dinner approached, the aroma wafting from the kitchen did little to excite the senses. Rangard, her ever-critical companion, remarked that her cooking had devolved into a watery concoction, lacking any semblance of flavor or substance. Klay, however, remained unbothered by this harsh critique as long as the meal was somewhat edible. She found no reason for concern. This indifference shocked both Rangard and Belle, who held more refined culinary expectations. Observing the dismal state of her cooking, Rangard reached the conclusion that Klay needed guidance in the culinary arts. Thus, he entrusted the responsibility of teaching her to Furin, a seasoned cook whose expertise would hopefully transform Klay's approach in the kitchen. Once Furin was done with expressing how impressed she was by the advanced tech in this kitchen, she began teaching Klay how to fry veggies and flavoring them, which took her a moment to explain what she meant when she said frying. After some time of cooking, the plate was ready and Klay and Belle both enjoyed it. Not wanting to leave them with this lonely plate, Furin decided to teach them how to cook another dish, which is this time gonna be made out of dragon meat. Again, it's not the meat you have in mind. Furin was surprised that Belle had that in stock, since it's so luxurious that Gourmand would pay a fortune to buy it. After being assured by Klay that she's good to go with cooking it, Furin managed to turn this meat into a delicious meal that she loved eating alongside Klay and Belle just as much as Belle and Klay enjoyed. Klay, for her part, began to question if her father was wrong this entire time about spices and flavors. Belle, on the other hand, handed over some dragon meat to Furin as she was on her way home, leaving her incredibly happy. Once Furin was dismissed, and before Belle could say anything stupid, Klay couldn't help but think about how delicious dragon meat actually is. She went to take a look at weapons in the blacksmithery after that, where she picked one of the daggers that Rangard was in charge of refining. For his part, Rangard noticed how chatty Klay was when it came to her fighting style and techniques, albeit it was impressive for him. Before she took her leave, Rangard gave her a woman armor, which Klay initially refused, until she learned that it was made since the old master was around. That didn't make things any better, as Klay began to feel the urge of getting rid of that old master for being well-cultured, if I may say so myself. It only took her the mention that Belle's taste in fashion is horrible that Klay finally agreed to trying the outfit out, and hey, she liked it, and so did Belle once they met later. Although Belle thought that Klay was in to show off her new outfit, Klay came in to discuss some business with Belle, since she really wanted to explore the dungeon. Klay even went as far as to suggest leaving a copy of herself to do the work while she explores the rest of the dungeon. Belle refused, for if she got eliminated during her exploration, she'll be banned from ever exploring the dungeon. Despite that, Klay agreed, and so she went ahead with Rangard and a golem accompanying her. With Belle already giving her all the advice and items needed, Klay began her journey. Her first opponent on this floor is the Spirit of Fire. Although Klay thought taking it down would be difficult, Klay was surprised to see the door to her reward opening. As she proceeded in opening up the chest, she sensed some sort of a magical trap in, so she took all the precautions she needed, which made her open the box safely, even though she was disappointed with the loot inside. Nevertheless, Klay proceeded with exploring the 9th floor until she ran into the tree spirit monster, which thanks to her strength, Klay managed to beat it with ease, even though she was surprised by the fact that the tree spirit isn't actually a spirit. Realizing that there's no point in pushing herself hard after defeating the next boss, Klay decided to use the recall scroll that Belle gave her to head to the headquarters, where she was happy to finally find someone waiting for her, much to her relief. For now, let's leave the dungeon and go outside to touch some grass, where Fren, after being defeated by a skeleton, got in the middle of a training arc. While he was at it, Lada joined him to express his thoughts on the challenge they had. Now that they set their priorities in order, there's no way they can allow themselves to fail once again. After all, they're in the top guild in the Adventurers Guild. Back to the dungeon, Klay got informed that they'll be interviewing monsters to recruit them. When it came to how necessary these new recruitments will be, Belle was determined that it'll be fine as long as the monsters were smart enough to know what to do and what not. To Klay's ecstasy, there will be some fighting involved, but that didn't get her rid of her concern about being around Belle. In fact, she freaked out when she heard that this job has a side benefit, but Belle managed to calm her down before heading to the job interviews, which will be taking place on the last floor of the dungeon. As she kept on discussing things with Belle, Klay was taken aback by how the table and couches felt out of place. It turned out that they've been there this entire time, and that since the room was already huge, Belle fought Klay further away. It's okay if you're confused about where exactly, for Klay is just as confused as you and I when it came to getting monsters. Belle already prepared spells that would summon each monster individually. The summoning process of the first monster was impressive for the emotionless Klay, especially when she saw the process ending in success. The first candidate was a dragon called Paraporo, and he was having a conversation with Belle without even being able to speak, which creeped Klay out. By the time the dragon got dismissed, Klay remembered to ask about the purpose of this interview, which turned out to be more of a get-along first meeting than an actual job interview. As for what Klay's role in this spiel will be, it's keeping anyone that will dare looking down on Belle in check. Just as Belle was about to summon the next nominee, Klay brought up the fact that she cannot comprehend what other monsters are saying. Just like your average American visiting the UK. So until Belle could figure out how to get Klay to understand other monsters, Klay has to try to comprehend them on her own to the best of her ability. Now with that out of the way, the second nominee came in, and it's a cat monster called Fuka, which was shocking to Klay, on top of being unable to move that is. The third monster on the list was called Teruru, and oh boy, he's a giant boy. Thankfully for Klay, the monster was able to talk. Heck, he even had some manners, which made Belle determined to put him as the 10th floor boss. And yet Klay was not willing to see him in a better light for obvious reasons. But perhaps what caught her interest the most was the knowledge about magic gems, how valuable they are, what purpose they serve, and how could Teruru get them from the demon world. Simply put, the monsters consider the dungeon as the demon world. If that wasn't confusing enough, the reasoning why monsters thought of the dungeon as such was even more confusing for Klay, especially that there are way less people who can use magic. When Klay realized that she's capable of using magic herself, she began to question her race. While she was at it, the fourth monster came in. This time it was a black knight called Heldend, who came in after eliminating the actual candidate for the job. For Belle, this was an unprecedented event since there never was an interviewee that got eliminated before. When asked about his reasoning for being here, Heldend claimed that he wants to get the magic gems, and that he's not going to take no for an answer. Seeing that Heldend admitted to infiltrating the dungeon after intentionally eliminating an interviewee, Belle decided to deal with such a rule breaker with brute force. Klay, for her end, was eager to deal with this threat, especially after she got permission to do so from Belle. Just as Klay jumped into the fight, Belle was concerned that Klay wouldn't be able to hold on to the fight for a long time for her inability to handle her magical power properly. But will her hard training on that aspect end up being fruitful this time? It didn't take Belle a long time to get her answer, as she bore witness to Klay paralyzing her opponent by getting rid of his arm and paralyzing him. Heldend tried to desperately reach out to attack Belle, only for the latter to toss him out, leaving Klay to deliver him the coup de grace to her opponent. Now that this entire spiel was over, the end to the job interviews came with it. As for what to do with Heldend's corpse, Belle assured Klay that she'll be calling out other high-ranking monsters to handle it. Still, Klay thought that it might be better if Heldend could serve somewhere in the early floors, and Belle was quick enough to figure out what Klay had been thinking, even though she remained worried about the far-reaching consequences of this decision. Still, Klay remained optimistic that resurrecting Heldend as a zombie could mean that she hasn't met her father as a zombie yet, even though she couldn't forget that Belle wouldn't be leaving any ashes of her father if she went all out. For the time being, Klay thought that it'd be best to focus on getting stronger. In another part of the battleground, Fren and his crew of thugs regrouped to confront Fuka once more. The clash was intense, stretching on for what felt like hours as both sides exchanged blows with relentless determination. Despite their exhaustion, Fren and his goons found themselves victorious, having finally overpowered Fuka in a hard-fought battle. Yet, even in their moment of triumph, they knew there was no time for respite. The looming threats of the day demanded their immediate attention and unwavering resolve. Once Klay was done with mimicking monster sounds, she proceeded in discovering the dungeon once again, while thinking of what lies through the fog that's in front of her. Before Klay went on her expedition, she learned that Belle was considering redoing the map of the 5th floor. After all, a random floor would suddenly have its map revised. The important part for Belle is to get the task done in a way that won't get them any complaints from other adventurers. For that reason, Belle decided to give this daunting task to Klay, as she made sure to give her clear instructions on what to do before making any decisions, including the safety of other monsters from traps. After giving it some thoughts over what to add and what not, Klay decided to take on the job, as she surprised Belle and Rangard with her reasoning for every decision she took. Klay herself was surprised that neither Belle nor Rangard had considered choosing terrains based on the strengths and weaknesses of the monsters, since they draw in lots of monsters. Belle admitted that she considered that decision at first, but she had to let go of it since there were more and more monsters coming in. Since she didn't want to rely on this method anymore, Belle gave full freedom for Klay to make up her mind. Rangard, for his part, agreed to do the same as Belle, but couldn't help but be a little cynical about it. In the end, after some back and forth about the planning, the team managed to come up with a new blueprint for the floor. When it came to Klay's issue with poor vision and straight passes, Belle explained it as a staging part, since there's nothing special in the dungeon, much to Klay's surprise. Still, she considered telling Belle that the only thing that would make this dungeon-like would be having Belle as a final boss, but she shied away from telling that idea out loud. As for Belle, she decided to hurry up with the modifications that Klay suggested. As such, she took Klay with her to the core of the dungeon, where they went through a sealed section, which requires a certain magical wavelength to open up, and I'm not gonna mention who that is. While they were at it, Klay was taken aback that the spirit of water managed to get to her undetected. To make matters worse, Klay was not able to resist the spirit's attempt to possess her. Fortunately for Klay, she's proven that she transformed from being a relentless hunter to being Belle's special snowflake now that Belle had saved her. Now that she made sure her snowflake was safe, she introduced her to the spirit of water, which made Klay get that clueless face of hers once again. There were also light and darkness spirits that light and obstruct vision in the dungeon respectively. Lastly, there's the earth spirit, which seemed familiar to Klay. Once introductions were out of the way, Belle proceeded to inform the spirits on the changes required over floor 5, which they made instantly. With the modifications being done with, Belle went with her snowflake companion to install the modifications in the control gem, and the rest would be left for Rangard to take care of. When asked about what Klay can help out with, Rangard told her to come and watch. The latter part of his statement wasn't baseless, as he turned the cave-looking corridor of the dungeon into an actual corridor within the blink of an eye using magic. When it came to adventurers entering the 5th floor, Belle pointed out that they'll be fighting through the old floor until the new one is made. Furthermore, Belle explained to Klay the reasoning behind putting slimes in the dungeon, what is needed to beat them down, and why most adventurers decide to ignore them outright. Seeing the way the slimes were extracted, Klay found that to be sloppy. On top of that, Belle realized that none of the slimes have ever dropped gems, and that there were some slimes that never respawned after being slain. As Belle further explained the reason behind their weakness and their raison d'etre in this dungeon, Klay began to make sense of it. Or so Belle thought, until she saw Clay's clueless face. Still, Belle proceeded in explaining what the staff does exactly to prevent the source slime from shrinking. Once this lecture was over, Belle and Klay headed to the plaza, where they made monsters pick papers that contain the position numbers where they will be. Once that's done, Fren and his goons were preparing themselves to enter the dungeon. For the time being, let's get back to touching some grass, where Klay heard from town that the king handed the throne to his heir, who seemed to be doing well. Usually Klay never thinks of such things, but she remembered it when she saw Belle dressing in a funny outfit. It turned out that Belle is going to have a meeting with the king himself. After that, the newfound town around the dungeon is considered part of the kingdom. Furthermore, the weaponry and gems from the dungeon have brought the kingdom immense power and wealth, which made the kingdom wish to take over it, which is very threatening for the dungeon. The kingdom has also apparently caused lots of problems between the dungeon and the main Thieves Guild, albeit it gave the dungeon managers the opportunity to establish direct contact with the king, which granted them autonomy on paper, but the dungeon remained not wanting to be fully integrated in the kingdom yet. As such, the managers came up with a system that sells gems from the dungeon to the rest of the kingdom. Now that the old king is gone, Belle has to meet up with him to renew the deal between them. How is Belle going to do that? By challenging the king himself, of course. As for the outfit, Klay refused that Belle comes out like an adult wannabe, but after some adjustment on it done by Rangard, it became more acceptable, albeit slightly weaker than the initial one.
足の動き出しが隠せるというのは利点かもしれないな。
Since she's going to accompany Belle, Klay was given the choice to do so in armor or maid outfit. If you guys fantasize about seeing Klay in maid outfit, then I'm sorry to tell you that your wish has been granted, as both Belle and Rangard insisted that she does just that, who proceeded in getting her rid of any concerns about her dressing. Upon receiving the news that the event was scheduled for tomorrow, Klay found herself in a state of disbelief and mild agitation. She had anticipated that Belle, known for her exceptional organizational skills and meticulous attention to detail, would have been well prepared long before this moment. As memories of previous events where Belle had flawlessly orchestrated every aspect came flooding back, Klay realized that while her initial reaction was one of surprise, Belle's propensity for thorough planning might still mean that everything would come together smoothly. Now that D-Day is upon them, Belle and Klay were in the teleportation circle to get to the royal castle. During their teleportation, Belle reminded Klay that there'll be violence, so she would like to avoid any needless attention from the general public. By the time they got to the palace, they found the castle butler Haim welcoming them and taking them to the arena, while Klay kept on telling herself to not get accustomed to lavish things. It didn't take them long to wait, as the new King Jasraid arrived with his retainers Lestance, Kiska and Algrid. Lestance immediately appeared as a bootlicker for his overzealous approach to prove his loyalty, as if the king had something to blackmail him with. That aside, Klay kept on thinking about what to do as a retainer of Belle, who's standing as an equal to the king. Once the two, Belle and Jasraid, were done with introducing each other, Belle introduced Klay to the king and his retainers as her maid, which got the fools to think that this is some sort of a joke. The king himself was overly confident that his men could defeat any threat, which sat well with Belle, as she was confident in Klay's skills. After confirming the stakes of this duel, Jasraid couldn't help himself from belittling Klay for being shaken for being thought of as the heir of the dungeon. With that out of the way, the fighting started in earnest with Lestance and the other knights facing Belle. The goons charged at Belle with hopes and dreams that they've been carrying of having the young king keep them working, while Belle kept on matching their attacks move for move, as she remembered the lessons her ancestor left for her before they took a fight with the previous monarch. While Klay kept on analyzing the course of the battle, Jasraid was getting increasingly uneasy about the possibility that they might lose, especially with Kisa losing the will to fight altogether. As such, he tried to play it dirty by getting Haim interfering. Fortunately for Belle, Klay came in clutch to prevent Haim from playing any dirty tricks that would change the course of the battle. If that wasn't enough, Klay's successful interception made a fool out of Jasraid. Left with no other option, Jasraid conceded defeat. As Belle and her maid could leave, Jasraid blushed while asking Klay about her name. Thinking that he might use her name against her, Klay answered that her name is Rangard. If that wasn't baffling enough for Belle, Jasraid's compliment for Klay's name was on a whole new level, especially when he requested they meet again. Only then Belle denied Jasraid his offer and left. Belle felt a deep sense of gratitude for Klay's decision to accompany her earlier that day. However, Klay harbored a different perspective. He suspected that Belle's request for his company was a calculated move, given that she was far more vulnerable than he was, both physically and emotionally. Despite feeling a twinge of disappointment at this uncharitable interpretation of her intentions, Belle's heart swelled with relief knowing that Klay was by her side. To express her appreciation, she treated him to a delightful dinner crafted by a skilled dwarf chef renowned for his culinary prowess. They dined in a cozy tavern, where the air was thick with the tantalizing aromas of roasted meats and freshly baked bread. It was said that somewhere in the realm, a professional chef was still on a relentless quest for his elusive lamb sauce, a quest that had become the stuff of legends. This lighthearted anecdote added a whimsical touch to their evening, reminding them both of the joys of companionship and the magic of shared experiences. On the Thieves Guild, Renfringe received a message from the king himself asking him for an investigation about who Rangard is, thus leaving the old man confused. By the time this information got to Belle, Klay realized the scale of her mistake, which now got both Belle and Rangard in deep trouble. Once Klay woke up the next morning, she kept on remembering that she's an orphan of parents that used to be a part of the adventurers who took an early retirement from life after failing a mission for the Thieves Guild. Since then, she grew up attached to Brance as her father, who taught her everything he could before disappearing himself, leaving behind a girl curious about his whereabouts and the true worth of the dagger he left for her. As she got used to work, Klay thought of asking Belle about when she goes to sleep, since she's always the last to sleep and the first to wake up. Klay eventually figured that although Belle has her personal room, the dungeon is technically Belle's house, which explains why she's been having a mess in other rooms. To Klay's surprise, Belle grew up in the dungeon in her early years. But with that in mind, it made perfect sense why Belle's common sense is warped. According to Belle, her entire working schedule is doing as she pleases as long as there's no urgent tasks to take care of, which makes work for her like doing household chores. As she thought more about it, Klay began to wonder if Klay has any hobbies, which turned out that she has none. After all, managing the dungeon for Belle is an everyday task. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the office, Belle noticed the weariness etched on Klay's face after a long, demanding day at work. Recognizing that Klay could use a break, Belle gently suggested that she take a paid rest day to recharge. Klay hesitated, her brow furrowing as she weighed the idea. After a bit of back and forth discussion, during which Klay passionately explained her desire to work harder and prove her worth, Belle listened attentively. Klay expressed her commitment to earning her paycheck and contributing to the team, feeling that every hour spent at the desk was a step closer to her goals. However, despite Belle's persuasive encouragement and understanding of the importance of self-care, the determination in Klay's eyes remained unwavering. It was only when Belle shot her a firm yet compassionate look, one that conveyed both authority and genuine concern for Klay's well-being, that she finally relented. Reluctantly, Klay agreed to take the day off, realizing that rest could be just as vital to her success as hard work. Left with nothing to do, Klay stayed in the dungeon's plaza, where she met with the Minotaur that she fought with on floor 9, whose name is Pekomo. He was about to spill the beans about why the once so eager monsters to talk to her are now so distant from her, but he managed to restrain himself from doing so. Aside from that, Klay was more concerned about the monster's knowledge about someone they call the Wind Slicer, until she managed to identify who said that. Figuratively, Klay approached Binky, who was maybe a little too excited to talk to her, until Klay asked her to calm down. Before she could ask her for anything, Pekomo suggested they talk in a more remote place, for self-explanatory reasons. Once they did, Klay proceeded to ask Binky about what she knew about the Wind Slicer, to which took Binky a while to remember. To her, just like for many others, the Wind Slicer is a notoriously dangerous explorer who's known for throwing his knives at a very fast speed that his targets cannot hear them until they're hit with them. By the time Binky and Pacomo began arguing about how legit these infos are, Klay was thinking seriously about them, especially when she heard that the Wind Slicer used to bring his daughter with him for training, which made her realize that she doesn't know what her father is capable of doing when he gets serious. Although Klay was thankful she never let Belle know about this embarrassment, her goal of getting stronger remained the same. For that, Klay is in need to obtain a weapon made by Rangard. But for the time being, Klay couldn't help but feel happy that her old man got such a cool nickname. Once Klay managed to clear off her head for a bit, she went with Belle to the goblin quarters. Klay was surprised to find the entirety of Wakanda inside the dungeon. I mean a goblin village inside the dungeon, where goblins were reaching out to talk to Belle in Goblinese, which Belle seemed to comprehend quite well. Although Klay felt bad for their inability to revive themselves, she felt great resentment towards them for the horrible things they do to women from other races to make sure that they reproduce faster than they lose. To her dismay, Belle showed her that goblins here doesn't do that, but they reproduce through a farm where they grow just like plants. If that sounded absurd as is, she had to witness the golems extracting goblins off the ground. According to Belle, this was her predecessor's idea, as it was too difficult to capture few female explorers for cultural reasons. Although Belle tried to further explain how goblins are mass-produced in this dungeon, Klay remained unable to comprehend it. To Klay's surprise, Belle wasn't taught any of the goblin reviving techniques from her predecessor, but she's still researching it and trying to figure out ways to improve it. Despite how impressive that was, Belle had to be careful with not letting any of the goblins go scot-free, since they're so dangerous that they could cause lots of problems. Although Klay was impressed, she couldn't stop wondering about why Belle would go to such lengths to maintain the dungeon. Meanwhile, there was spreading news about murderers in the dungeon. For a fact, Lada heard it from the market, suspected that the group is led by a smooth-talking Hilkamast, and relayed the news and his thoughts to Fen. Furthermore, Lada confirmed his information after asking the receptionist from the Thieves Guild. As such, Fen decided to intensify his training with his boys while keeping a close eye on those murderers. Like many others, Millieland kept a close eye on the murderers in the Adventurers Guild lobby. But in the dungeon, Hilkamast came in handy to save some adventurers from being eliminated by goblins. Despite that, Millieland kept a close eye on him and his team there too. While in the Adventurers Guild Master's room, the Master was upset with how these murderers were getting a liking from the guild's higher-ups. As he was taking his job seriously, he made sure he learned about the new developments that his secretary was aware of, especially about their consistency of being such smooth criminals. Although the Master was willing to believe these stories, he was aware of the presence of scoundrels, and in addition to how unreliable he found Millieland was, the Master decided to bide his time. He was only relieved to learn that she managed to make it in the dungeon already, and that he got Refringed by his side to solve this case despite all odds. Simultaneously, Belle was informed of this case, who in return relayed the message to Rangard. Klay was not left in the dark, as she was informed by Belle about what's going on, in a goth attire that is, since she was aware that these murders used to be a common occurrence during her predecessor's reign, and that Klay lost her parents because of such events. Belle was determined to never let any more murders happen again. Although this sounded fancy, Klay jumped to the conclusion that she should purge adventurers. Belle opposed this, as she pointed out that she wants the perpetrators to be caught and turned into undead, to turn them into an example for anyone that would dare to break the rules. When it came to the outfit, Belle explained that it's her executioner outfit, as she proceeded to give another for Klay, which it did fit her well. Now that their preparations are complete, all they have to do is wait for the Thieves Guild to give them the signal to start. As Hilkamast and his companions pressed deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the dungeon, they meticulously set about clearing each shadowy chamber of lurking threats. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, and the occasional flicker of torchlight danced ominously against the walls. Throughout this arduous task, Hilkamast seized every opportunity to win Millieland's loyalty. He believed that securing her trust would be pivotal in their precarious journey, though unbeknownst to him, Millieland harbored her own secret agenda, cleverly masking her true intentions. Meanwhile, all seemed to unfold in her favor, as the dungeon had yet to reveal any significant threats. However, in a sudden, unexpected twist of fate, Bugs, one of the smaller yet surprisingly agile creatures that inhabited the depths, lunged at Millieland in a frenzy, catching her completely off guard. At that moment, Hilkamast, unaware of the true nature of the peril surrounding them, maliciously disclosed his plan to dispose of Millieland now that she appeared cornered and vulnerable. What Hilkemast failed to recognize was that Belle, ever observant and skilled in the arcane arts, had been discreetly monitoring the unfolding drama. Using her magic alongside Rengar, her steadfast ally, she had a watchful eye on her companions and their adversaries alike. The urgency of the situation galvanized her into action, and she prepared to intervene just as the tension reached its peak. The carefully orchestrated dance of deception and loyalty was about to take a dramatic turn. Before they could go, Lady Oblivious remembered to ask about the details of the mission, which were granted to her by Belle. Now with that out of the way, the duo headed to the crime scene immediately. Simultaneously, Millie-Elent was in a dire situation. As her hand hurts and she was left with no weapon, Millie-Elent contemplated her options to make it out of this room. Just as the smooth criminals were about to strike, golems merged from the ground. If their presence wasn't annoying enough for Hilkemast, their ability to repel his attacks were outright infuriating for him. Bugs tried to wreck them with his knuckles, but his confidence took an Uno reverse when his attacks proved to be futile. As the smooth criminals realized that their struggle was useless, they decided to withdraw. Millie-Elent thought that she might be next on the chopping block, but she was surprised to see the golems handing her back her mace and asking her to get lost. If the murderers thought that their ordeal is over, then they ain't seen nothing yet, son, as they found themselves struggling against another golem. Before finding themselves magically teleported to Belle's fighting room. Once they realized where they are and who they are going up against, Hilkemast tried to talk his way out, but Belle refused, leaving the murderers no option but to fight. The murderers tried to target Klay, as they thought that she might look weak, only for all three to find themselves struggling against two innocent-looking girls, where Klay got rid of one of them without much effort. Atoto ran away after this horrific realization, while Hilkemast attempted to walk his way out by attempting defeat and striking a deal with Belle, only for his hopes and dreams to be shattered completely, as Belle had already made up her mind on punishing him for being an outlaw for him just like Atoto, leaving Klay impressed with this unintended show of force. While this threat has been dealt with, Millie-Elent was still badly shaken by the earlier turn of events that she decided to keep her guard up against the Ice Wolf's fangs, even though their reputation has been crystal clear so far. If that wasn't bad, Fen found his entire team disappointed in him for making a girly girl cry. With this crisis solved, Klay had the time to enjoy her own cooking, while being thankful to Furin's cooking lessons, which were far much better than the best guide that Jamie Oliver might have made in his career. Rengar was pleased with seeing Klay having such a good mindset that made her progress, despite his concerns about her inability to season her food. As she sat with him and Belle later for lunch, Klay couldn't help but wonder what monsters do to nurture themselves, only to learn that their diet is provided to them by the staffs of the dungeons to the best of their ability, which includes, to Klay's surprise, hunting. To demonstrate how this cooking process is made, Belle decided to take Klay to the largest block of the dungeon where all the hunting is done. Klay was impressed by how similar the block is to the real world, but she couldn't help but try to unsee Pekomo eating grass. The latter was freaked out by Klay's reaction that he decided to prove to her that everything in this block is as fresh as the real world, starting with grass. The more they walked in, the more Klay was surprised to see that rabbits and birds live here too. Once they got into the woods, however, Klay was alerted to monsters hunting their prey directly, just like wolves hunt their prey in the real world. As such, she decided to take the freedom to scare a certain Binky who was eloquent enough to show her how she hunts mice, as she thought that Klay cannot match her speed, before finding that the girl is jumping side by side with her.
森での鍛錬は久しぶりだ。懐かしいな。
Which made the cat decide to stop hunting for the rest of the day. Klay was also surprised to learn that there's more tasks here for golems to do, as well as other creatures that contribute to the food production in this block in the most efficient way possible, including gnomes, treants, and stone turtles. Still, Belle found their effort to be a tad too overzealous at times, that they end up causing trouble for clashing with other monsters. As such, Belle decided that it's much easier to teach golems how to do all of these tasks instead. Hearing this, Klay began to grasp a little of how Belle is committed to continue experimenting and managing the dungeon regardless of how tricky it can be at times. Klay was also surprised to learn of the presence of a lake in the dungeon, much less the presence of aquatic monsters, but perhaps the biggest surprise to Klay was Railman bathing in this lake, while the 8th floor's guardian was enjoying its time there too, perhaps a little too much. Before Klay could do anything stupid, Belle decided to take her precious snowflake to the kitchen, where Teruru was in charge of cooking meals and medicines for monsters, and that he was eager to discuss his medical expertise with Belle, thus leaving Klay as oblivious as always. Although Belle was bursting with excitement at the prospect of taking Klay back to the hunting block, Her enthusiasm was quickly tempered when she spotted the alarm's ominous glow pulsing in the dim light. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Belle swiftly redirected her focus, leading Klay to the Crystal Room, a sanctuary filled with shimmering gems and delicate enchantments vital for their plans. It was essential for Klay to revert to her original body regularly, and today was no exception. In the heart of the room, Belle prepared to change the main gem, knowing the delicate procedure required Klay's assistance to ensure the gem wouldn't shatter under the strain of its overwhelming weight. The heavy crystal was an imposing presence, its facets glinting with a myriad of colors, each one pulsating with latent magic. Belle had anticipated this challenge and had meticulously devised a strategy for what lay ahead. As the two worked together, the swapping procedure progressed smoothly, yet Klay found herself struggling to maintain her grip on the gemstone, sweat beading on her brow as she wrestled with its immense heaviness. Belle watched with a mixture of concern and determination, aware that they needed to succeed. The stakes were high. The gem represented not merely a physical object, but a conduit of power that linked them to the dungeon's arcane energy. With a sense of urgency propelling her, Belle had formulated a plan to transport the gem to the point of origin, the most perilous chamber within the dungeon. This room, teeming with volatile magic from the dormant dungeon cores, represented a double-edged sword. While it held the potential for immense energy, it also posed a catastrophic threat should anything go awry. The failed imitation of a dungeon core they were dealing with had to be quarantined, lest it endanger the very fabric of the dungeon itself. As they prepared to make their move, Belle's mind raced with the possible consequences of their actions, but she was resolute. Together, they would navigate the labyrinth of magic and danger, locking away the errant power before it could wreak havoc on their world. Now that Klay delivered the gem to its position, Belle requested that she stay to watch her do the rest of the work, which unfortunately resulted in the destruction of the gem. Still, Belle was relieved that she managed to make it this far into refilling a gem. With this task finally being done, Belle figures that it's about time she takes Klay to her special place in the block to watch the sunset. While Klay was thinking about what made Belle inherit this entire dungeon, her rail of thoughts was cut short by her growling stomach, which made the amused Belle request they go take a bite. On their way there, and as the day was coming to an end, Klay began to comprehend the reason that Belle decided to recruit her, and finally made her mind to stay by her side in managing this dungeon. That concludes the anime recap for now. As always, if you enjoyed, let me know down below and I'm out.